Good evening. It's 7:32 on Tuesday, November 15th, and I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Darien Board of Finance to order. The first item on our agenda tonight is going to be the election of officers. Although Paul Hendrickson is not here, we did just recently have the elections. None of us were up for election, given that we all have 4-year terms, and this is the sort of 1 year every once in a while that none of us were up. So there are 3 executive officers of the Board of Finance, chair, vice chair, and secretary. So I guess I'll open the floor for nominations for chair.
I'd like to nominate Jim Palin for chair. I don't think I can imagine anyone with a greater knowledge base, expertise, commitment to the town and to this board existing. I'm so grateful for the time you have spent, and I know you'll continue to spend, and your leadership, especially in bonding, has been invaluable. So thank you, and I hope you'll be chair again.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that and echo those words.
Thank you very much. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Hearing none, we'll close nominations for chair. All those in favor of electing Jim Palin as chair of the Board of Finance, say aye.
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 Okay. It's unanimous. Thank you very much for the nomination, the second, and most importantly, I think, to the rest of the board for the past year, for all the work that you all have done, because I feel like it's a lot of the work that you all do here at the table and on your respective committees that help make this board function and work well with other boards, and actually I'll go as far to say to be a little bit of fun to be on. So thank you. So the next officer will be that of vice chair. And I guess I'd like to open the nominations, if I could, to nominate Dan Baumgartner to be vice chair. Dan has been a great partner on this board as vice chair, helped me think through a lot of the planning and organization around meetings and items that come around this board, and to do the work, most importantly, that gives the information to the balance of the board so that we can all make sort of informed decisions and become a good friend along the way. So very much appreciate it. Is there a second?
I'd like to second that and second your words.
Okay. Any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of electing Dan Baumgartner for another year of vice chair?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
I'll just thank everyone, and you particularly, Jim, because you are so inclusive, and I really appreciate that. So on everything that you think matters, and a lot of things that maybe don't even matter, you reach out and make sure that that we've communicated before it becomes public and discussed more broadly, and then of course the rest of the board for the support.
Okay. Thanks. Nick, I do think it's important to make sure we're all as prepared and share as much information as possible. But so when we come to this table, we're all doing the best work. The last, but certainly not least, of the officers is that of secretary. I guess I would like to start off the nomination. I'd like to nominate Taylor Carter again to thankfully act as secretary. It's the
Worst secretary you ever had.
It's the best. It's sort of the quietest, but one of the most important jobs, kind of keeping us all on track. The agenda, minutes, timers, which gets fed to Channel 79. It makes it easier for all of our clients out there to kind of follow along with what we do. So thank you very much. Is there a second?
I'll second. I'm sorry, guys.
Rob?
I second for all the reasons you just said.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other nominations for secretary?
Absolutely not.
There's a
No.
reason I was nominated.
So all those in favor of Taylor Carter serving as another year as the Board of Finance secretary, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oh, are you
So I have
abstaining?
to vote for myself.
It's easier, so unanimous. Thank you, Taylor.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, so the next order of business on the agenda is going to be for our board to accept a motion to move into executive session, which pursuant to the Connecticut General Statutes 1-206C, will be to discuss certain school security initiatives and appropriations. So is there a motion to move into executive session?
So moved.
Rob moved. Second. Dan? All those in favor? Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to adjourn to executive session. So it's 8:30 right now, and I'd like to take it's 8:30 right now, and I'll accept a motion to return into public session. David moves. John seconded. All in favor of returning? We're now back in public session. Okay. The next item on the agenda relates, next item on the agenda, I should say, is public comment. There's no one let the record know that there's no one in the public that wants to talk. Okay, so the next item on the agenda, next couple items relate to sort of school security appropriations. The first item is an appropriation for school security personnel in the amount of $296,000, and the second one is for capital appropriation in the amount of $335,000. I'd like to make a motion to actually switch the order of these and first talk about the capital, and then talk about personnel after that.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, it's unanimous. So, Duke or Dr. Adley, if you want to give, just given that we're back in public session here, just sort of a short introduction of the capital appropriation for $335,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This evening here, we're tonight looking at the capital appropriation for school security, and particularly around the exterior doors. Typically, we look at in school security, physical infrastructure, personnel, and protocols. This falls under the physical infrastructure. And your next item on your agenda falls under personnel. We brought this forward out of budget season because we felt that it was extremely important to act on that immediately. These make improvements to the exterior doors, and essentially they indicate when those doors, they indicate to staff members, administration, principals, campus monitors, secretaries, they indicate to them if those doors are open in any capacity. So they get notification for those, and then they are corrected immediately. So that's the main appropriation for the exterior doors for all of the schools. Authorization already has the schools. The other schools would have these improvements.
Okay. And in terms of timing and so forth, is this, the appropriation would become effective once approved by the RTM at the December 12th meeting? Would you plan to start right after that?
Yes, I mean, the significance of actually asking for it out of budget season is that we would like to get this in place absolutely as quickly as we possibly can. So yes.
Okay. Any questions on the capital? Okay. Well, I guess to move through this, I'll entertain a motion to approve a capital appropriation for school security enhancements in the amount of $335,000 by way of a appropriation from the town's general fund.
So moved.
Okay, Dan moves.
Second.
David seconds. All those in favor?
I have a question.
Oh,
To what degree could this be funded out of the Board of Education surpluses and wherever they might exist?
it's a good question. This is capital. So capital is typically any type of material. Larger capital amounts are not considered to be part of the operating budget. I think Rich could probably correct me, but I think usually capital over $5,000 or $10,000 is not included in the operating budget and has to come separately as capital.
So typically, if it's on items over $5,000 and has a useful life of over 5 years, it's considered a capital expenditure. And as best as you can, you typically try not to commingle capital and operating expenditure.
Thanks. So that's.
Could you give us a couple of examples of these expenditures over 5,000? What are you talking about?
Sure. I mean, it could be like a security camera as an example. The door project here would be an example. Purchasing a vehicle would be a good example. Those would be the type of examples that you'd want to probably have in a capital budget. Typically, they're capital assets or some type of repair to an actual physical plant.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. So all those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is an appropriation for school security personnel in the amount of $296,000. So, Dr. Adley, if you could just maybe give a little brief overview. I know the Board of Ed has talked about this
Sure.
at 2 or 3 different meetings.
So these fall under the category, obviously, of personnel. And as you may know, at the high school and the middle school, they have SROs, and those SROs carry a firearm. The basic recommendation is we feel the need to provide that similar, I won't call it the same because the SROs play a little bit of a different role in some capacities, but a similar level of safety for our elementary schools. Given what has gone on, the board has actually been talking long before Uvalde happened. They were engaged in an ongoing discussion, so unfortunately, coincidentally, they've come at the same time, and we feel that this would be an important improvement for security to provide SSOs at the elementary school. They will also be armed to provide a similar level of security for students and staff. There are 7 positions here. 6 of them are SSOs. 1 would float with six positions. You'll likely have to cover. You've got 2 at the high school also, so 2 at the secondary level, middle school and high school. So invariably, there may well be somebody who's out, so the other one would actually float around, cover for any absences for professional development, sickness, or otherwise training, just in a case of an absence. And then there's a director of security who will oversee the campus managers and the SSOs.
Okay. And in terms of the 6 SSOs, those will be reporting into, if you will, to the school administration side, right? Versus the SROs, which technically report into.
Yeah, they are Board of Education employees. The SSOs will report directly to the Director of Security, and thereafter through the business office and the superintendent.
Okay. Any questions, anyone else?
I don't.
I mean,
Same question.
Pardon?
Same question as I asked before, perhaps more relevant now.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess if there aren't any, one of the topics, Alan, I had sent across to you and to Rich was sort of an update, if you will, on the surplus. I know when the board first started discussing this back in September, sort of 1 month in the school year, you had certain estimates of the surplus, but I think as watching the last couple Board of Ed Finance Subcommittee meetings, I see that surplus had grown. I think, Rich, would you be able to give us an update just and maybe help for the board, since this came out today, walk us through where the surplus sort of was in September and kind of how that has evolved and developed?
So we do have a forecasted surplus. Last month, we were forecasting, inclusive of the SSOs, assuming that there was no appropriation, to be about a positive $10,000. In the Finance Committee that we're actually going to have on Thursday, that's actually changed to about $565,000. The largest change being excess costs related. So our threshold, which was just set in October, was set at a little over $104,000 as a threshold that we have to generate. We did budget $109,000, so we're picking up essentially $5,000 for every claim that we would submit. And so that's generating about $500,000. Part of the reason for the change in the claim threshold is our enrollment had dropped from what we had projected. And so we actually see that as part of also why we have savings in our budget in general. So we had 3 elementary sections that were under-enrolled. So we had budgeted for 3 elementary sections that did not get filled. And so we're carrying those surpluses for salaries and benefits. So within the 565 includes the assumption that there's about $296,000 for SSO costs. So if the board, unlike the previous question about capital, operating costs are people, right? Because they're reoccurring expenditures. This would be an operating cost, which is why it's an operating request for an appropriation. So if there's not an appropriation given and the board wanted to continue forward with SSOs, we would just bring transfers forward to the Board of Education for approval.
And therefore, that
expected surplus would go from 566 and we go down by 296.
So the 566 is inclusive of that
Is net,
296?
so it would go up by
So it would stay at 560, so it would essentially stay.
Okay.
We would have to move money from those unfilled sections that were showing a positive balance and move them into those deficits.
So, Rich, maybe just to clarify, so before we hire the SSOs and the Director of Security and some of the equipment that they need, so does that mean that the current, I guess, projected surplus, which projected doesn't always equal actual, is that about 850, 860?
If you strip out the SSOs.
So about 860, and if we use 296 for
Correct,
the
then you're at that
SSOs and Director of
565.
Security, that would bring it down to sort of
565.
565.
And 500 and change was a change in the assumed excess cost
So if
reimbursement.
we were to look at where the balance is, so it's really in three buckets primarily. One is those three teachers that we didn't fill, right? So that's a couple $100,000 right there. It's $500,000 in excess cost because of that threshold change. And then prior to the start of the school year, but after the budget was adopted, we negotiated a new salary schedule for maintenance and custodial employees. So any employee who was hired after July 1st goes on a new salary schedule. So we actually have 4 employees on those new salary schedule, and that's generating a little over $50,000 in savings. So when you combined all those three together, you're getting to that about $800,000.
So is that 500,000 in ECR the amount that we would claim with the state, or the amount we would expect to be reimbursed from the state, which is a different number?
So it's the amount we expect to be reimbursed. So the
Okay, so
new-
it's at 70, 75%? Or?
So the new state budget actually tiers reimbursement for excess costs based on town wealth. And so while it used to be that it fluctuated anywhere from 68 to 80%, now we're capped at 70%.
70%.
And Rich, I think we had originally budgeted this year's budget, I think at 75% reimbursement.
So we did. So
And I think you took out 130.
$138,000, assuming that our threshold was going to remain at the 109. And so we lost 5% on the reimbursement, which dropped us to 138 below budget. We're gaining essentially a little over $4,000 per claim, so we're gaining another $500,000 there. And then we do have a couple more claims that we'll submit on December 1st. And so the swing will show a positive 378 against budget, but it's a $500,000 swing from where we thought we'd be.
And given where we are in the budget, or in the school cycle, would you expect the ECR estimate to materially change from this point, up or down?
It could change up or down. So we have one filing on December 1st, and then we have another one on March 1st. And so the December 1st is, what we know here and what we expect to happen between December 1st and June 30th. If a placement changes, or a kid comes back to district, or a kid moves out, or a kid moves in, or a kid doesn't attend all the days that they're supposed to attend, those can all fluctuate what you're gonna submit, and then you're gonna resubmit in March 1st, and then that's what your final reimbursement's gonna be. I wouldn't expect it to change, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it certainly could change, 100 or less.
Okay, that's helpful.
And then, Rich, other things in the budget that could move it unexpectedly, like things like energy costs, like are we hedged? Or did we run risks on that portion?
So we did lock in energy rates for diesel and oil at the end of last year before the budget cycle started, so we're at $2.30.
Oh, yeah.
Can I buy some?
Good job.
Unfortunately, that does
Yeah.
expire. Unfortunately, that does expire June 30th of this year, so the next year's budget probably won't be quite as good. We are going to have, Aquarian is proposing large rate hikes for water. It isn't expected to take place until April, so we're only going to have about 3 months of those excess costs for water. So for this year, it's probably only going to be, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. We'll have a bigger hit in the following year because it's going to be 12 months. There's still a couple of teaching vacancies that haven't been filled. So those could go either way, higher or lower, depending on how it happens. The last 4 that we hired ended up being a net increase to the budget as opposed to a decrease to the budget. And then you also always have things like substitutes that could be variable. If we have a good winter or a bad winter, if we have a good winter, you could have more money within facilities. If you have a really bad winter, you could have less money within facilities for things like snow removal. So the later we get into the year, obviously the forecast would firm up.
Got it. But as I think about the overall budget, you never really bake surpluses into the budget other than budget control, which I think this year only included two teachers?
2 teachers, but we did use it in full for the director of mental health.
Got it. Okay, so I think, it sounds like sitting on 560, energy prices are fixed. We've hired almost all of our teachers, although some could come in a couple steps higher or a couple steps lower than what we expected. But in terms of, I guess one of the reasons I'm asking, this is, while I know when you guys originally sort of put together this appropriation request, or I guess let me step back. I think, at least personally, I've listened to you guys deliberate around security for a while, and Dr. Adley spoke, I think, quite passionately about the need for it today. I think all 9 Board of Ed members voted for saying that this is sort of, a very important exercise for the board to go through. And I think the police chief, who isn't here now, but I think spoke at both your meetings, that this was absolutely the right solution for today in Darien. So I think this is, I at least personally think this is a sort of a very worthwhile and important effort that you guys are undertaking. I think over the past month or two, as your surplus has grown to 800-odd thousand, even after the, if you were to pay for the security security officers and director inside your own budget, you'd still be left with a considerable budget. I'm a little bit inclined, just it seems like a special appropriation is a little bit less necessary today, as opposed to a couple months ago when this all started.
Well, it can be reconsidered, right, to the extent
Yeah.
that facts change.
What are the consequences in your mind, financial consequences of funding this out of your surplus?
So putting excess cost aside, because that was it's really the biggest swing that we had and relatively the most recent news that we've gotten. We are sitting on those 3 sections that we're not going to fill. So that's kind of money just sitting there. Obviously, if you start paying for unexpected expenses that occur, you run a tighter budget, and your margin for error shrinks. As long as the excess cost comes in, we're going to be sitting on a relatively healthy forecasted balance at the end of the year. But anytime you start, whether it's hiring employees or paying for, technology or items or materials or whatever it is that might not be budgeted, any, room for error starts to shrink, and you just, might have to tighten things up, and you might have to think twice about certain things that you might have to approve. Or we might have to come back to this board and say, things material changed, and these were what the changes were.
So this discussion, there's a couple of board members here, obviously important ones, but at the same time, how they are going to react to the news of you got to find it in your own budget. Yes, it looks like there's going to be an adequate surplus, but that discussion, that will be new news to them too, right? Starting tomorrow, and then Thursday's the meeting for the finance subcommittee. So then I don't know how they're going to respond in terms of they may have other questions of us that they're thinking of that we're not. So it's up to them to sort of reflect on that and reflect on whatever decision is made by the Board of Finance this evening.
Understood. And maybe just check my notes here. The 860 before security instead of 560, if you will, after that. Does that already incorporate the Director of Mental Health?
Yes.
Projected higher?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're not projecting to spend the entire allotment, because obviously it's November, and the person's not here yet, so we're not spending what a full year's salary and benefits would be, but it's a prorated portion of what that person would be.
Got it. Well, and I think that's maybe important to point out publicly that, sounds like it's only 75% of a year for the Director of Mental Health and only 50% of a year for the SSOs and the Director of Security. So as it relates to next year's budget, obviously I think that's something, this decision where we're only going to experience half a year of it this year, it'll be, I assume, baked into the full budget next year?
Correct. Yep.
Is this projected surplus, how does it compare with past years? Roughly, it seems higher, materially higher, principally because of the ECR.
So
is that a fair observation?
It is. So last year we had a material change in ECR, and we ended up giving back about $650 to the town, and about $500,000 of that was ECR. The big change is that we have 3 elementary sections that we expected to tip that didn't tip, and so that's the money really that we're sitting on that we weren't expecting to. So.
Thank you.
And we're able to use the budget control.
For the Director of Mental Health.
Gotcha.
Rich, can you just walk me through the ECR $500,000 surplus again? So if we budgeted 75, the state's capped it at 70, so we're losing 5%.
So we were losing 5% on every claim.
Right.
So we lost essentially $138,000 of what we thought we were going to get. Then we budgeted a threshold of 109, meaning that we have to spend $109,000 per claim before we get anything back, and then we'd get that 70% of anything in excess of 109. So what ended up happening is our threshold ended up being set at a little over 104,000. So instead of having to spend the first 109, you now have to spend the first 104. So you're picking up essentially $5,000 for every claim that we're going to submit. You multiply that out over the number of claims that we're going to get, it's about $500,000. And then we have about 10 or 11 new claims that are going to get submitted. And so some of those are ones that we didn't actually anticipate we were going to get because we thought our threshold was going to be higher. And so we might not get a lot from those claims. We might get just a few $1,000s. But now we're actually able to submit the claim because the threshold was lower.
Got it.
And is the benefit, do we think about that as, I should say, it's a reimbursement. It's still just being reimbursed on a portion of what we're spending here, but is it really 70% of the differential from 110 to 104 or from 110 to 105?
So yeah, you would get, so you submit for the whole amount and then the state would reimburse you 70% over that threshold. So you're not really getting 70% of your cost back because you're still on the hook for that first 104 or 109, depending on how you look at it. So it's really probably closer to like 30 cents on the dollar as opposed to 70 cents on the dollar, but it's a reimbursement of what you actually spend.
Got it.
First of all, thank you guys so much for pushing this initiative forward. I'm so grateful as a parent of elementary school age kids. I'm thrilled we're doing this. Couldn't support it more. Couldn't have wanted it more for the last many, many years. When do we expect to have these people in the buildings working?
Second semester? January?
January. And given that you acted so quickly to approve the mental health director, I'd like to see you act as quickly with this. If we don't approve this tonight and you act with surplus, can you act more quickly? And do we have a commitment that you will support these positions in the absence of a special appropriation?
Well, that commitment would need to come through the Board of Education, which they've indicated, but financially they would have to put those things in place.
Because you are already hiring or
Yeah.
posting the jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to think that we can move even more quickly, perhaps.
Well, yeah, and I think, when the board voted on this on maybe 2 weeks ago, I think
Right,
relatively
right, yeah,
soon
yeah.
after that, you guys put the applications up,
That's correct.
right, publicly, and I think those are actually set to close, I think, in December, right? Actually, before the appropriation would.
Is that set to close?
I think-
It is, yes.
Yeah, I think they were set to close or finish up hiring in mid-December, which, not, I guess, unfortunately, we're in this unique period of the year where the RTM doesn't meet until December 12th for the state of the town, which I think is when they will certainly be considering the capital request. And then that becomes effective 10 days after. So, at least certainly it was my hope that, just given the surplus, that you guys would still move forward with this. And then I guess I would also say, I think as many of us on this board have said many times in the past, is if you do have a shortfall, or you think we're coming up on a shortfall, or you don't have a surplus, and there is something as important as this that you think you need to move forward with, there's always an ability to come, for a special appropriation.
So I'll just reiterate, and thank you, Taylor, for asking the question, and Jim, you kind of said what I was going to say. As board chair and having done this for 8 years and been chair for the last 2, I know we have the commitment of the Board of Finance behind us. If we come, we have the data, we have the reasons behind it. Taylor, to your question, the board is 150% committed on executing on this. We'll go back to the board. We have an agenda meeting tomorrow where we'll set the agenda for next week. I don't see any issues with talking through this with the board, understanding the changes and the surplus and where the budget has landed around excess cost. So I'm confident we'll get through this in short order so we can keep it moving fast forward.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's good. Any other questions for?
So I think that makes it even quicker, so that if the Board of Education meets next week and basically authorizes this project to be funded out of the surplus, that would be quicker than us, because we have the RTM that we'd still have to get through on our side. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, and I guess Yeah, maybe thinking about
So
this.
it would be even quicker if it was done that way. Notwithstanding that the Board of Ed would have to go back. Is that,
Yeah, the only thing I would add is we committed, which we'll continue to do, because I think it makes sense. The Board of Ed and the administration is committed to give an informational presentation on November 30th to RTM Education, RTM F&B, and RTM Safety. So regardless of the way this gets funded, we'll continue to provide that update to them, kind of an update in a Q&A session. But it would, I think, kind of give us even a quicker start to continue down the path we're going if we have our meeting next week, and then we can move forward.
I just want to make sure we weren't imposing a delay, and that's not what's
No,
happening
because I
in
think-
your judgment.
Yeah, no, perfect, Ed. And I think having gone through this before, we understand the process through the RTM. So I think we were building that in our overall plan, but this allows us to continue to do what we're doing from an interview standpoint too.
Well, I think it's a great idea, meeting with the RTM committees. I mean, they're all forming. I think last
Yeah.
night they started, and because the reality is, well, you're moving forward on this now. I applaud it, and hopefully we'll have everybody, it looks like in the school, beginning of the second half. It's ultimately going to come up in the budget next year, which,
Yeah.
we're all going to be meeting on Saturday in about 6 or 7 weeks, spending a whole day talking about the budget. So I think sort of updating everybody today, or I should say in the next couple of weeks and so forth on this, I think it'll certainly, I think, pay off in terms of making sure everybody's informed as we.
You know, we've been working with those subcommittees, and I just think it'll be a good informational session, and maybe we'll walk away with some questions that we need to continue to inform the community about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know, before I accept the motion on the $296,000 appropriation for the personnel, I don't know if anyone wants to say anything, but I'd just like to make a few words and just on the record say that I do support the decision of the Board of Ed in terms of moving forward with the SSOs in this initiative. They were unanimous about it. Dr. Adley was pretty passionate about it, and certainly our Chief Anderson was extremely passionate about it, so I kind of fully support it. And while I don't think the special appropriation is necessary, given sort of what's happened, relatively recently to the surplus, while I don't think that's necessary, I do think this project is necessary, and applaud you guys for putting it all together.
And further,
Hear, hear.
anything that could speed it up would be my choice, so I agree wholeheartedly.
Okay, anyone else have anything to say?
Here, here.
Well, I guess,
So what is that, what's the consequence of?
so I can ask for a motion, and someone can make a motion, and somebody can second it, and we can have a formal vote on it, or we can just not move that item.
Can we move the table it? Make any difference?
We'd have to revisit it.
Yeah, I think for purposes of the RTM, of this
would
ultimately
not-
going to the RTM, I think, and just being clear, it's probably best, I think, to have a vote on it. I think we've all explained very clearly why we think the project's important. We don't think the appropriation is necessary, given the recent news about the surplus, but I do think it's probably important for, I don't know, should we be voting no on this? Yes or no on this, or should we just table it? I'm sort of open.
I prefer to not have a vote.
Okay.
And given we're supportive, but it can be interpreted that we're not if someone just picks up the vote. And so honestly, I'd prefer that we not
Yeah.
move this forward.
Okay, so I
That's
think
my
the way
biggest
that.
concern, actually,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Okay,
I'm
so-
so supportive that I don't want to do it, because I'm hoping it'll move faster if we don't
Right.
No, understood.
grant
So-
special appropriation.
So I think what I'll do, since it is on the agenda, I will ask if there is a motion, and if there is no motion, then we'll just move on.
Okay.
Okay, is there a motion to appropriate $296,000 for the school security personnel? No motion? We'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Very much.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, yes, there were a couple other items on the agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are a couple other items on the agenda here. The next one is discuss and take action on appropriation and bond authorization for the fire department heavy rescue truck. I think, this is $2,006,000. As you know, Jen wasn't able to be here. Jen's sick, so that's why she wasn't here yesterday or today. So, and we don't have anyone here from the fire department to discuss that.
I make a motion that we table this item for just further future discussion when we have people that can walk us through it.
Yeah, when our next meeting, just to kind of confirm here, would that be the 13th, right?
Let's check.
Or no?
Of December,
Yes.
December, right?
So the 13th or the?
I don't think
It's the 20th.
The 20th, wow.
Yes, the 20th.
Okay, so I think moving this to the 20th would still allow, if we want to take action on it and discuss. If you recall, for this to go back to the Board of Selectmen, I think to be discussed as part of the budget.
Mhm. Okay.
So can I have a motion to table the fire truck heavy rescue until our December 20th meeting?
Yes.
Dan moves. John seconded. All in favor? Okay. Okay. The next item is to discuss, take action on a request to close out the project for the Hanson Road bridge repair in an amount of $169,000. Just to remind you all, this project is not being canceled. It's still going forward. We've just taken and replaced our sort of temporary appropriation, if you will, out of the capital reserve with an actual formal bond resolution, which we approved and was approved by the RTM last night, I believe, right?
Yep.
So by canceling this appropriation, it'll move those dollars back into our capital reserve, or I would say free them back up out of our capital reserve. Any questions around this?
No.
Okay. I'll take a motion to close out the Hanson Road Bridge Repair Design Services Project in the amount of $169,000. Rob moves. John seconds. All those in favor? Okay. The next item is to discuss and take action on an appropriation of a donation for the replacement of the McGuane Field Playground. This is a donation, if you guys have seen here in the materials, that Federal Realty, which is undertaking the very large sort of development in the Rowan Heights side on sort of like the northeast corner right there, has agreed to sort of fund $22,000 of the replacement of the McGuane Field Playground. Part of the way the project was originally designed and anticipated was for it to be taken down now, but the new park won't be set up until, when the equipment gets here, sort of like the middle of next summer, which would effectively mean that there would be no playground there for a period of 7 or 8 months. Monica worked with the team at Federal Realty and approached them regarding this, just given sort of the proximity of that to their project and so forth. And they agreed to fund $22,000, which will allow this project, which will allow the playground to stay intact. And then in connection with the complete rebuild of it and so forth next summer, tear it down and remove it. And so they graciously agreed to contribute $22,000. I think it's I'd like to publicly thank them for offering to do this. I think it's that development is, you can really see it taking effect down there. And I think while it's certainly a financial development for them, it's a sort of large part of our community here, because we all see it every day. And I very much applaud them for offering to contribute to this project here. The balance of this program is being funded. This is one of the projects that fell under the ARPA, the ARPA funds that we received. So, any questions on that?
Did the ARPA funds then get reallocated elsewhere?
If any excesses in it, now, part of delaying this until next year will be an increase in the cost to sort of tear it down, but, and replace it, but any unused ones will flow back into the ARPA contingency. And then I feel like, Dan, you may know by the end of next year, any of those funds in that contingency, we need to reallocate, right?
Well, my understanding is that the cost, well, the allocation in the ARPA fund for the playground was $175,000. I'm not 100% sure of this timing thing that you're talking
Yep.
about now versus later, but my understanding of this 22 is actually to take it down.
It
So I'm
is.
not sure that $20,000 to disassemble the playground and the surface was part of the cost of building a new playground. So this is, I think,
Yeah.
enabling that to occur.
Okay,
I think it's in addition to the ARPA funding.
okay.
So I'll take a motion to approve the $22,000 gift from Federal Realty. Dan moves, David seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay, the last item here is the discuss a request to increase the maximum tax abatement for emergency service workers. So Jen's put together a memo on this here. And so the Fire Commission, on behalf of the 3 fire departments, has requested an increase to the tax abatement from $1,000 to $2,000. So the current value of the tax abatement, if you look at it across all of the property in Darien, is currently $71,000. Increasing it from $1,000 to $2,000 will basically increase it by $65,000 to a total cost of $137,000.
So my understanding is for eligible, and there's a criteria that people have to
Yep.
pass through, they basically get lower property taxes. They get a rebate on their property taxes not to exceed currently $1,000 over a year or maybe more years, more than 1 year, and that max would increase to $2,000
Correct.
over. So it'd be like $500 a year for 4 years, and then they would have used up their allocation of this program. Is that?
That is correct.
Yeah.
So Dan, as you know, if someone has an abatement of debt and a forgiveness of debt, it's taxable to them. Is this structured in such a way that they're not being
Whether it's-
burdened with taxes?
No, it's not necessarily a forgiveness of debt where it would effectively become taxable income and so forth. It's just, it's a reduction of taxes.
Another kind of taxes.
What?
Another kind of taxes. Reduction of real estate taxes without an increase in income taxes.
Correct. So this would be.
That's fine.
This would effectively be an increase of around
I mean,
$65,000.
it's like the forgiveness of student debt is unfortunately taxable to the people that live in certain states.
Correct.
Okay.
I think we owe a lot to our volunteer firefighters and our EMT workers, and I think this is a great program. Frankly, I didn't know existed, and I'm
Yeah.
very supportive of.
Yeah,
This proposal.
and I think as you point out, there is a quality, they do need to be active, not just members of the fire department, but active, and that requires a certain number of calls and a certain amount of training that they all undertake and so forth, all of which,
And performing.
yes.
Right.
I just have one question. In Kate's memo, the very last line says this includes 26 Norwalk residents who volunteer at one of our fire departments or at post 53.
So-
How can that work?
That works.
They
So,
wouldn't-
so there's an agreement with Norwalk. So there's a number of, this was explained on the Board of Selectmen. So there's a number of Norwalk residents that volunteer in Darien, and there's a number of Stamford residents that volunteer in Darien. We have an agreement with Norwalk. We don't have the same agreement with Stamford. We have an agreement in Norwalk that their residents that volunteer in our fire department are eligible for this program, and our residents that volunteer in their fire department are equally this program is made available to them as well.
So there's
So-
no net payments either way, it's just a matter of,
I'm just,
Each
what I'm
side.
saying is if there's a Darien resident that's a volunteer firefighter in Norwalk,
yep.
that there's a quid pro quo.
Okay.
There's I don't know if it's the equivalent, I don't know what the dollar amounts are, and that's a partnership that we.
In any case, it's a small dollar amount,
Yeah.
and it's good neighborly process, and we all want to encourage all of our volunteers as much as possible. So
Right.
it's fine.
Yeah, I think as we learned in our fire department tour last year, I think there's close to, if you include some of the junior firemen, close to 200 active volunteers across like the 3 departments, and that doesn't include post.
Right.
But there is,
Right.
Yeah.
certainly, I think we're uber fortunate to have this number of volunteers that will, do what they do each and every day.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Dan said. I think they do an amazing job, and I think this is a small price to pay for their services.
Well, they don't do this for the money, obviously. They do this for the service to the town and to their families and everything else. And this is just another way of adding to the thanks that we owe them.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I'll accept the motion to increase the maximum tax abatement from 1,000 to 2,000.
Moved.
Rob moved. John seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay. The next issue is the financial report. Jen's not here. No, I don't know.
I didn't see anything in particular that pops out as materially concerning. And, I wrote down a couple of questions, but it's nothing that's urgent that needs to be answered tonight. It can be answered at our next meeting.
Yep. Sounds good. Yep. Maybe just one thing to note, just kind of given the overall interest rate environment, Joan has sent around her update, and
Yep.
we could, given interest rates have gone from 0 to 4, she has continued to sort of outperform her budget, which was, obviously when you're setting it at near 0 rates, the amount would be near 0, but, and she's also, I think, indicated she's moved more into stiff, which is now at or even slightly above, I think, what she can get in some of the T-bills. So it's it's certainly can be great benefit to the general fund.
I would suggest that there's a wide disparity in the rates, and some of it is just the time at which a deposit was placed in a lower interest rate environment. But stiff and T-bills are actually paying very attractive rates, and I think we should, and they're relatively secure, and just suggesting that putting money in those places seems to be a worthwhile
Yeah.
endeavor.
Yeah, I think she's made a few T-bill purchases, and I know she's
Not a lot,
continued to
right.
move into stiff. I think, with T-bills, this is something I think that they've been, working slowly and carefully and continuing to do more as they think about it. And just one thing to note in these numbers, as Joan pointed out, the T-bill investment income doesn't actually get realized until the thing matures or if we sell it, unlike stiff and others where we get an accrual, if you will, every month. So next thing is the approval of the minutes from our regular meeting on October 18th. This is, I think, our second meeting of the new and improved meeting minutes, or simplified minutes.
I thought they were accurate.
Any questions, comments? All those in favor of approving the October 18th Board of Finance regular meeting minutes? Unanimous. Okay. Special assignments, committee reports. I'll be very brief, but I would suggest that everyone take a look at the Board of Ed meeting from last week. They announced the settlement of a contract with the Darien Educators Association, the teachers union. That will be a top line increase of about 4.5% per year, 13.68% over 3 years. A little bit higher than what it was under the last contract, but I think there's certainly a number of They had a bunch of comps in their presentation and so forth. I think Nadine emailed that around last week. We were certainly, I think, from a stated increase at the top end, but as you know, Darien has a fair amount of its overall teacher increase baked into step, which means through the natural turnover that you see in the district, that ultimately brings the rate down. That's generally been 100 basis points over the last 3 or 4 years between the sort of stated maximum increase, which assumes there's zero change in their staff, versus the actual when it employs people naturally retiring, hiring, leaving, and so forth. I think the one most notable change that they made was on the lower end, if you may recall, some of the various educational achievement levels had steps 3, 4, 5. They started off much lower. They basically, over time, cut off the bottom few steps so that an entry-level teacher in Darien will now start, if you will, a couple steps higher than what they would have otherwise started. I think Dr. Adley spoke to that being, I think, an important tool in he and Marge's belt as it relates to hiring new teachers, particularly sort of younger teachers, just given sort of the cost and travel time and so forth around sort of attracting people to Darien. And I think now, at least on the minimum level, which not all of our teachers are, but certainly at the minimum level, we're basically ahead of and above almost all of the schools in our comparison group. So while there are not a ton of teachers down there, it will make us a lot more competitive, I think, hiring them. So I don't think it's necessarily a benefit we're going to notice tomorrow morning, but I do think they do expect to sort of, over the next couple of years, that will help to sort of build some of the
change? You said we were doing it already, right?
No, they eliminated some of the lower steps. So rather than a teacher with, let's just say, 2 years of experience starting at step 3, they would now start at step 5.
Put us more competitive with other towns.
Exactly.
We had lost competitiveness with other towns
Correct.
at that entry level, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Because it's not always the case that step 3 necessarily means that you have 3 full years of education when you come in. Anything up through and including 5 years will now start at 5. So, and that will go in front of the RTM probably in their January meeting. We do not vote on that, but obviously all that gets worked into the budget, which we'll be reviewing come
But the
January.
RTM approves it.
The RTM has to, yes, act within 30 days of once the Board of Ed files it with the RTM, they have 30 days to either vote for it, against it, or just not vote. So I think they'll probably drop that with the clerk in the next 3 or 4 weeks just to start the 30-day clock running and make sure they have enough time for the January meeting and maybe a snow day, which happened a few years ago. So that's it on my side. I know we've heard a lot about HHR. Anything sort of new?
No, last night the RTM approved the funding for the roof project, so thank you everyone for that. We have a meeting tomorrow where we'll get an update on further design and progress with all the fundamental things. Planning and zoning, there are certain the town hires its own consultants to double check certain studies for part of the project. We'll be approving the funds for that tomorrow, and then also we will be putting in place the formal payment approval and processing processes, which we are borrowing from Oxbridge. Obviously, when a system is working and already proven to be effective, you don't need to change it materially. So, but that will have to get approved tomorrow as well.
Is that just in terms of when a bill comes in, who looks at it, who signs off, and then I guess who ultimately sort of sends it to Jen?
When a bill comes in, who has had to review it before it gets submitted to us? Once it gets submitted to us, who on the committee has to review it? How many people have to sign it? It's delineated by dollar amount, so there's a different grade for who and how many have to sign, up to a point where the whole committee would have to take a vote on certain things, like if there are any material changes in the design process.
On Oxridge, the assembly wing is under construction now. It's kind of concrete pour and steel framing month, so that's all ongoing. The perimeter is kind of laid out. You can see it now, and I haven't been there in a couple of weeks, but the concrete pour and the steel is going up, and that's kind of exciting up there. But otherwise, everybody's pretty happy. And then a group of us, led by Kit Coons, met last week to review soft costs in connection with the project, just to make sure that the non-construction, hard construction costs were in line with budget, and we were very satisfied. There's a little bit of follow-up, but we are in good shape there and continue to be very confident as to the numbers I've shared previously, which is, under budget, well under the appropriation and even under the lower budget. So
Setting a really high bar for me.
for Mr. Price.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
Audit, don't have an update. Usually Jen's driving. I think they're on premise. The auditors, started the audit, so we'll get an update when we meet. And I sent on the IT steering committee, I sent around, if you guys saw the breakdown of it. I was expecting, so I'm on the efficiency piece of it. We were sending a survey out that I think all the members here should be getting. I thought it was coming out today, so there might be delayed a few days. So if you see an IT survey come out, it's from that particular group. Okay, I think we're sending out to 220 people is the last number I saw. Just to get an idea of what people think of the services that are, like when you go to Darien, CT Gov, that kind of stuff, or even just passing emails back to each other. What do you think of it? That kind of stuff. So it's gosh, off the top of my head, I think it's like 26 questions or something. I kind of just pick your top 3, yes, no's, just something efficient that we can just kind of put together and share with the group.
And how many pages can I add to the addendum?
You can add as much as you want, my friend. So those are my 2 updates. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it. Okay. Except the next meeting is December 20th, right?
Yeah.
I do suspect we'll probably have a few things on there because we need to deal with some of these, but everyone will be around.
I move that we adjourn for holiday cocktails following that meeting.
Finally.
I would like to do that. And we can do that under the FOI rules, so long as we don't talk about business.
One brief suggestion. I heard that there was a rumor somewhere that the person who gets the top votes on this team gets a drink from everybody.
That's okay. I'll pass on it this time.
Well, since no one got any votes, so we're tied at 0.
No, I meant election to
We
the Board of
default
Finance.
to last
That's what I
year's
mean.
results.
That was a year ago.
We'll look at that.
Well,
So between the 2 of you, so it's you? Is that kind of what are you asking for a free drink? Is that what
He's
you're
looking
asking
for a free drink.
yeah, I was actually doing that.
And we'll get you Uber home
Pretty
too.
sure.
Yeah,
We'll give you 6
I hope
drinks
it's
and send
not
you
on
home in
one
an
night.
Uber.
We'll figure it out. After we adjourn here, we'll look at all the elections and who got the most votes. Taylor beat me, so I know it's.
David and I are
Are
going to
you
abstain
foregoing
from that.
Chairman's report, new business, old business?
Yeah.
I'm
We got
at the
nothing?
bottom of the list no matter what, so, however you want to slice it.
Okay. Well, that's it on Chairman's report. We will schedule some holiday cocktails here. No new business, but I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We're adjourned.
Thank you.